John, it's all you.
All right, thank you, John. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is a very exciting opportunity for me because I get to talk to a bunch of landowners at once, homeowners, property owners at one time. Primarily today, I'm just focusing on basically the East Mountains and the tree species you have there. So pinyon, some ponderosa, juniper, we don't have too many problems with those, but at the end, if you want to ask some questions about junipers, I'll be happy to answer those. Really, I know some of you probably have houses, maybe a second house up in the mountains or something, and that's a totally different presentation than what I'll be given today. So really, it's just more focused on those species you have in the East Mountains. So I have two presentations. The first one is basically my program and what I do. I'll kind of go through that one fairly quickly, just because I want to focus more on the second one, which is drought, bark beetles, and wildfire risk. So I will go ahead, start sharing my screen. Okay, let's click that button. So is everyone seeing the whole screen?
Yes.
I believe so. Okay. All right. So this is an overview of the Forest Health Program. And again, my name is John Formby. I'm the Forest Health Specialist and Program Manager for New Mexico Forestry Division for the Forest Health Program. I am an entomologist by training, but I do, as being Forest Health Specialist, I need to know about pathology, plant pathology as well. And I'm located in the Santa Fe office. This is a picture of red band needle blight on the Philmont Scout Ranch, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in a minute. So what is an entomologist? An entomologist is a scientist that studies insects. And, that's kind of a weird field, kind of a niche field. And really, how can you make a living being an entomologist? Well, like me, there's forest or tree entomologists, those that specialize in pests or even just beneficial insects in the forest environment. Agricultural entomologists study really, the pests that impact our food crops. Medical entomologists, that's really a big deal in the armed forces, but those are those that study, mosquitoes or ticks, those kind of things. Forensic entomologists, those that study insects that come to cadavers or corpses. And taxonomy, those that name and describe insect species, and then apiculture, those that keep bees, honeybees. And a fact here is that forest insects and disease kill more trees per year than wildfire. 2 out of every 3 trees killed every year is killed. 2 out of every 3 trees are killed by some sort of insect. So a light note here, starting with an insect joke. So a dung beetle walks into the bar and he asks the bartender, "Is this stool taken?" So want to get that out of the way. Maybe some of you heard that one before if you've heard some of my my other presentations. My forestry background, I have a bachelor's in urban and community forestry. That's traditional forestry like silviculture, how you grow timber, how you measure how much timber you have in the stand, and how you procure it or cut it down and send it to the lumber mill. And then plus horticulture, arboriculture, landscape architecture, and landscape contracting and real estate. And that was a new program when I first started at Mississippi State. Usually every Society of American Foresters accredited college, they have a summer field session, and that's where you spend about 6 weeks out in the field learning how to do everything that foresters do. And this was in Mississippi in the heat of the summer, and I had 20 or more ticks attached to me by the end of the first day, and I quickly learned how to dress myself so that that did not happen again. A PhD in entomology, really life sciences with a concentration in entomology from Mississippi State University. And I studied laurel wilt disease. This is ambrosia beetle that was introduced from Asia into Savannah, Georgia. It carries a pathogen with it, a fungal pathogen that our trees don't have any kind of can't defend against. So it's attacking and killing a whole family of trees, the laurel family, the Lauraceae, and avocados included in that. And it finally did make its way down to Miami-Dade County, where the avocado groves are in Florida, and there's no way to control the insect or the fungal pathogen. So they have to clear cut. They were having to clear cut avocado groves down there to try to control it. And it's attacking about 3, 4, 5 other species of native laurel family in the southeastern US. And they're really worried about it getting to Mexico and California and wiping out all avocado altogether. Interesting fact is Tom Hanks's brother is a forest entomologist, and you know, I had the opportunity to meet him, but he does not like talking about his brother whatsoever. While I was getting my PhD, I worked as a consulting forester. I was a registered forester in Mississippi. I did restoration. This is bald cypress restoration that I was doing there, wildlife habitat improvements, and of course, tree health, my specialty. So my program is funded through the U.S. Forest Service, state and private forestry. So that's a different offshoot than the National Forest System, and it's a cooperative forestry agreement. So my program and the Forest Health Protection Program at the Forest Service work closely together. It's really forest and tree health on state and private lands. I also help municipalities and national forests, or national forests too. Some more examples are homeowners associations, the State Parks Division, the State Land Office, NGOs, cities and towns, and private landowners like yourself. 3 primary duties: technical assistance. So I come out and identify what's killing or harming your tree. Aerial survey, I'll get into that in a minute. And ground-based surveys, just driving around looking at trees, dead trees primarily. And I manage the Forest Health Initiative program. And I'll get into that in a minute too. Others, I taught at Highlands in 2020 spring semester, right as COVID kicked off. So half of the semester was virtual. I taught wildland pest management at the same time as doing this job. Research studies and pest monitoring with the Forest Service, Forest Health Protection out of Albuquerque, and universities such as NAU and Highlands. Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, here I am helping some Rocky Mountain Youth Corps do some Douglas fir tussock moth monitoring there. You see that the little moth on the right in that picture, that's the female. The tussock moth female does not move. She doesn't have wings or anything. Basically, she stays where she came out of her cocoon on the tree. Technical assistance aspect, provide forest health expertise and respond to insect and disease outbreaks. That picture with the dead piñons in it, that was a landowner up in El Rito, said, I have trees dying all over my property. So I went up there and helped him. Really, it's not much you can do at that point, but I just gave him the options at that point. Education, here I am giving the fruit tree pruning and health workshop at the Santa Fe Rail Yard. So that kind of is education outreach wrapped into one there. Insect and disease identification, you know, you send me a picture, no matter what it is, it doesn't have to be a forest insect. I can usually identify it, but, you know, sending me physical specimens is best so I can look under the microscope if I don't really know what it is off the top of my hand. Sometimes images or photos aren't the best. And just monitoring throughout the state. And I'm responsible for all over the state, for state and private lands. The technical assistance, I provide them, you know, not only to private landowners, but our districts. We have 6 districts throughout the state. Here is an example, the Bernalillo district, they called me over the winter. They had done a thinning or assisted in a thinning in August of 2020. And then I got the call in winter of 2020 that we have all these dead and dying trees post thinning. And so I went out and basically told them what happened. This is how you can fix it. And unfortunately, the people lost about 100 of their residual trees, the ones that weren't cut down during the thinning. So they lost 100 trees on top of the trees that they had thinned on their property, and they were not happy, needless to say. And here's wood chips. That's a big thing here that happened on the property. Is wood chips were spread all over the property. This attracted the bark beetles together with the dwarf mistletoe that basically robs the tree of any resources on top of drought. That was basically kind of a trifecta, perfect storm of what happened in this project here. I do aerial survey. This is for about 5 weeks a year. I'm in a fixed wing flight, a fixed wing high winged aircraft, a Cessna, and this is a collaboration between the Forest Service and myself, performed annually June through August or September. We record data on tablets in real time. So this is what it looks like when I'm up in the air. All those pink lines are the flight lines that we took just in the northern part of the state. And so we have this tablet running in real time, and we can mark areas on the forest that have current year's damage, mortality, or defoliation. That's how we keep up with trends in the state. We survey about 10 million acres of forests and woodlands annually, and it's very cost efficient, about less than a penny per acre to do this. And here I am. That's a picture of my office out the window there. I think that's Truchas Peak right there, and there I am in the back of the aircraft. That's probably about 5 weeks into it when my neck is stiff and I'm ready to go home. Ground surveys, basically I just drive around and look at things. However, I do check anomalous aerial survey signatures. Sometimes we're in the plane, we don't know what's going on. We see a spot like this in Philmont. We're not really sure what it is. So I could call Philmont Forester. I say, I need to come check this to determine exactly what that is so we can enter it in our database, exactly what it is. So I went up there, hiked up to that spot and found out that it was a fungal disease issue, which we don't have too much in the state because it's so arid, but it was extremely humid around this time on the Philmont, and that's why that, and it was a really rainy spring. I think that was 2019. So that fungal outbreak just kind of took off around there. Checked dead, dying tree reports, and just windshield monitoring. And that kind of led to me discovering this kind of 11 or 10,000 acre outbreak of Janet's looper. I was driving up to Ski Santa Fe to go hiking the Windsor Trail, and I saw this little patch of dead trees. Of course, that's a national forest, so I contacted my colleagues at Forest Health Protection, said we need to go check this out, and it was Janet's looper. It's only found in Arizona and New Mexico, and it was the only outbreak that we found this far north. The last one we had in the state, and the only one we had in the state, was in the Lincoln. So this is as far north as we found it. This is the Santa Fe watershed. Some of those trees will die either directly from the feeding or indirectly from bark beetles. And it's a winter feeding insect, which is really weird. That caterpillar feeds during the winter when there's snow on the needles and stuff. And that's a male on the left and a female on the right. Adult moth. Forest Health Initiative, Tom and Sharon Binion take advantage of this. This is a cost share program. I pay 70% of thinning costs. The landowner pays 30%. It's treatments on private land to help mitigate insect and disease issues. You need 10 acres or more to apply for it. You also need a stewardship plan in place, but you can apply for funds for a stewardship plan through my program. And you have to have some sort of insect and disease issues present, like dwarf mistletoe, bark beetle activity in the area or on your property, etc. And this is the Duhan property, and that's an example of the after, what it looks like after a forest health thinning. Okay, let's. If y'all have questions on that one, let's just save it to the next presentation's over. I'll switch to that one right now. See. Okay, that should be up. This is forest health concerns for landowners and drought, bark beetles, and wildfire risk. So, we're in exceptional drought right now in the state. And those of you that were here in the early 2000s kind of know what can happen when we're in exceptional drought. The bark beetles can really take off. Early 2010s, we had not quite as bad as the early 2000s. And then here we are at the early 2020s, and we may have the same kind of issues that we did in the early 2000s or early 2010s. This is just kind of, this image here is the Pecos wilderness, kind of smack dab in the middle of the Pecos. This is spruce beetle killed Engelmann spruce. All that basically gray you see are dead trees from spruce beetle. But spruce beetle is going to get in there and thin out those overly dense, unhealthy stands. So it's a natural process. It doesn't look very good though. So I'm going to kind of give you a little summary of our 2020 data that we found around the state, just so you know kind of what's going on out there, and then we'll get into drought and bark beetles and wildfire. So we did end up doing an entire survey area, even with COVID. We flew June to August. We had no scares with COVID or anything, but we were the only aerial survey team in the country to completely do a entire survey. This is kind of what it looks like here. That's the pilot on the left, and Dan Ryerson. He works for the Forest Service, Forest Health Protection. I fly with him quite regularly in the plane, and I stepped up my ground-based surveys on state and private land just so I knew, everybody was at home, and I kind of wanted to get out and make sure I knew what was going on out there on the ground. So 2020 forest health conditions, the top 3 mortality agents we found in the state: spruce beetle. Usually this is the number 1, 31,000 acres mapped with mortality. So not all 31,000 acres are dead. That just means that 31,000 acres had some sort of spruce mortality caused by spruce beetle on it. Most activity is in northern New Mexico. We have a little bit of spruce at Ski Apache, and there's a spruce population there. And of course, there's spruce beetle there. So we have a little bit of spruce beetle activity there on Ski Apache, around Ski Apache. Douglas fir beetle, usually it's not number 2. Usually ponderosa pine bark beetles are number 2, or pinyon bark beetles. But Douglas fir beetle was number 2 last year with about 13,000 acres. Usually we'll see increased activity around recent fire scars, and we had a pretty good amount of fires last year. So, we'll probably see that's probably why we saw it jump up to number 2. Ponderosa pine bark beetles, this is several species, 3 to 4 species responsible for most of the mortality. Several dendroctonous species. Dendroctonous is the genus. It literally translates into tree killer. So I know you probably heard mountain pine beetle, which we don't really have in the state, but our big one here is a western pine beetle, and that's a dendroctonous. Then we have Ips species, which kind of attacks stressed trees or those that fall over because of wind or other issues. And that was about 12,600 acres, so just 200 acres less than Doug fir beetle. Western spruce budworm, so this is defoliation agent, so usually caterpillars is what we're talking about here. Western spruce budworm is a chronic issue in New Mexico for decades and decades, on top of decades it's been here. About 300,000 acres mapped with damage. It kills or severely deforms understory regen. So in those stands or those areas we see it, we don't see much understory regeneration because they just get, just chronically defoliated year after year, and they get deformed and they eventually die. Generally confined to forests north of I-40. Aspen defoliators, about 60,000 acres. This is western tent caterpillar. I'm sure you've seen some of that damage in the tents up in the trees if you go up the Sandias. Large aspen tortrix, another caterpillar species, and western tent caterpillar is a chronic issue in and around Aspen Vista area of Santa Fe National Forest. We've had it up there, and you can see it from Santa Fe, just a huge swath of defoliation going across that area for about 5 years now. That usually, it's cyclical, it'll drop off soon, but this is 5 years is pretty abnormal for that cycle to be going on. And then ponderosa needle miner, this is a teeny tiny little insect. It actually mines within the sheath, an individual needle in the sheath. So it's teeny tiny. We've been watching it for about 3 years now up on the Vermejo Ranch, so Ted Turner's ranch near Raton. and third year of outbreak. The first year was about 60,000 acres. Now it's down to about 49,000 acres, but that's a picture of it. So all that yellowing you see is needle miner, mostly Colfax County, so Vermejo Ranch, and we did find a new infestation mapped on the Carson National Forest near Trace Piedras. So it seems to be expanding or moving around a little bit. Agents of note, we saw this about 36,000 acres of ponderosa drought stress symptoms around the state, from basically Las Vegas down toward the Gila. And older, usually, ponderosa will yellow, will senesce their older needles and get rid of them, but that usually happens in like August or September. We were seeing this in June or July. So really the drought is playing a role in this. Probably won't lead to direct mortality, but it can stress the trees out and may lead to increased bark beetle activity or bark beetles, coming to those drought stress trees and taking advantage of that. Janet's looper, I mentioned that in the other presentation, other slides. We've gradually seen it go down. That last year was the third year of activity. We don't really see much activity. That's kind of crashed altogether. We did map about 2,500 acres on the west side, east side of the mountains from Ski Santa Fe. That's down from 11,000 acres mapped the first year. They feed on Doug fir, spruce. We found it in bristlecone for the first time up near Elk Mountain in the Pecos Wilderness or Santa Fe National Forest. And that was a new host record, the first time it's ever been found feeding on bristlecone. And, bristlecone is a very, significant tree. It's long-lived, can be thousands of years long-lived. So, if it's feeding on that, that can be a problem. And limber pine. Like I said, the outbreak is mostly over. And that's a picture of the drought stress ponderosa in the Zuni Mountains. But like I said, we found it a good bit around Las Vegas as well. And this is a picture of the Janet's looper kind of looking the other way than that other picture I saw showed in the other presentation. And that's Santa Fe kind of down in the background there, but that's the Santa Fe watershed. And that's basically what it looked like while we were doing our surveys in the summer. Of course, they feed during the winter, and that's what it looks like after they're done feeding in the summer. This is a pretty cool thing I did this year for the first time. New Mexico Forest Health Story Map for state and private lands only. So you can go to this link, and I'll provide these slides to John. You can go, and I have the links at the end of this presentation too, but you can go to this link here. You see there's a little downward arrow here. You can scroll down. As you're scrolling down, it changes pictures. It'll put nice maps up for you and everything. So you can kind of read over this at your own leisure and just kind of, get a little bit more in-depth narrative of what's going on in the state on state and private land. So this excludes national forests. So moving into, and I kind of want to mention something else here. Every year I do put out a comprehensive 2020 forest health report on state and private lands. And it's right now it's a PDF. When it's not COVID, I usually print 100, 200 copies and get those out to the districts and private landowners. But that link's also at the end of this presentation, and that's much more comprehensive. It goes into detail of each insect species, what they do, how many acres is affected on different land types, but it's really focused on state and private lands. Okay, impacts of drought and higher temperatures on tree health. So in 2020, it was the second warmest year on record and the fourth driest year on record. So, that definitely does put some stress or a lot of stress on trees, particularly pinon and ponderosa. Juniper's pretty tolerant, actually. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about from here on will be pinon and ponderosa, primarily pinyon focused. So there's a lot of research out there. You know, drought mediated changes in tree physiology weakens trees, and then leads to bark beetle attack. You know, observed and anticipated impacts of drought on forest insects and diseases. And bark beetle cause mortality in drought affected ponderosa pine landscapes in Arizona. There's, I don't know, many more publications dealing with this, but these are a couple. So we have a lot of research, we have a lot of information out there about what happens to trees when it gets drier and warmer. And you know, that's what I kind of read and interpret for landowners and help them with management via management recommendations. So this is a departure from normal precipitation from January 26th of 2020 to January 25th of this year. So looking at a year, and here we are, you know, red colors, bad, you know, green colors, good. So, I mean, in some parts of the state, we had, you know, 10 inches less of rain than we normally do. You know, and let's see, Santa Fe, Bernalillo counties, you know, we're in, a lot of it's in the red or orange, so 2, 4, 6 inches less than we usually get. This is a departure from normal temperatures throughout the state for 2020, so January 1 to December 31, 2020. Again, red colors bad, green, blue, you know, all those other colors good. So only a couple of parts in the state do we see, you know, good colors, green. You know, but a lot of these, and then I did notice a lot of these kind of are over national forests, like red blob down kind of, you know, Lincoln National Forest, you know, we got up toward the Santa Fe National Forest, and Carson National Forest. So, you know, a lot of those over the national forest areas. This is the Drought Monitor Index. This was January 5th of this year. It hasn't changed much. We've seen a couple of areas in like the northwestern on Navajo Nation. It's improved a little bit. Up there near Chama, New Mexico's improved just a tiny little bit. And over toward the east part of the state where you see kind of a, you know, the yellow colors over there, that's improved just a little bit. But really, all those dark red areas are exactly the same as they now than they look like at January 5th. So, you know, we are definitely seeing some exceptional drought conditions in Santa Fe County, Bernalillo County, those kind of things, and basically all over. What I find interesting, you see there, I have a red box around 1 year ago. 1 year ago, you know, 50% of the state had no drought, and 0% of the state was in D4. But then you look up at current, up at the top there, and 53% of the state's in D4. So it's just goes to show you how fast things can change within a year when we don't get a good monsoon season. So things, you know, I know a lot of y'all do thinning. If you do have enough acreage and stuff, you can do thinning on your property, or just remove individual trees. So these are kind of tree removal and thinning recommendations I have for you. In Pied is Pinus edulis, so kind of a short way to write pinon. And then Pippo is Pinus ponderosa, so a short way to write ponderosa. And this is thinning recommendations in pinyon and ponderosa during D2 to 4. You know, and much of where we all live is in D4. So try to thin during or remove trees during the bark beetle inactive period. And this can really go to pruning too, especially if you're doing some heavy pruning to kind of you know, reduce your ladder fuels on your property. So this can go for pruning as well. Try to thin, remove, or prune during the bark beetle inactive period. That's October to January. Really, bark beetles, you know, in our area don't They might emerge. They don't really emerge or start coming out of the tree until it's about 50, high 50s, low 60s for a couple of weeks. So we're talking about, probably April-ish. So, but I just put January here because, some of that material will still be producing that you remove in January might still be producing these chemicals that bark beetles can pick up on. So that's why I say January, that way maybe most of those chemicals have dissipated into the atmosphere by the time the bark beetles start emerging from trees. Of course, this is all strong suggestions, but not mandatory. You can do it how you want to. But if you do thin during the or remove trees during the bark beetle active period, don't leave large diameter material on the ground longer than 30 days. Two things. Well, what's large diameter? Well, anything over 4 inches. Bark beetles, they attack these trees in mass. So they need a certain amount of, area under the bark to feed and raise their offspring. So we say usually 4-inch diameter is large material, and they can colonize that. 4 inches or larger. So if it's 3 inches, you could probably leave it there and it'd probably be okay. 30 days, why 30 days? Well, this is about the time that it takes a female to enter the tree, to lay an egg, and that egg to grow up to an adult, and then that adult to leave the tree and infest another tree. So it can be as long as 45 days, depending on temperatures, but 30 days is basically what we recommend. Account for other forest health issues or site features within the stand, and I have a slide for that. I'll get into that in a minute. Monitor tree health post thinning and reach out to forest or tree health professionals if trees start fading, dying. So, if you have a thinning on your property like that, I showed in the other presentation where I got the call in December, they had that thinning done in August. They started noticing things in September. If I would have gone out there in September, we probably could have slowed that outbreak down, or probably not gotten rid of it completely, but definitely slowed it down. So if you see something different with your trees, reach out, and because something's going on. It may just be drought, but it may be bark beetles. And if in doubt, I'm always available to visit the site and make recommendations. And this is how John and I kind of got together in this presentation. It's because I visited, he had questions, and I visited his property, and that led to us talking about me doing a presentation for the folks in the East Mountains. So tree removal, thinning recommendations, and pinyon and ponderosa again, and this is slash management. So what do you do, or just tree removal? What do you do with your trees, or the material, the smaller diameter stuff that's left on? Well, you can chip it up. And this is, and you can see there's a twig beetle attacked pinyon there with a bunch of chips around it. And this is that same project area that I showed you on the other presentation. That was done in August. They should not have chipped and spread it over the entire property, because chipping releases very high levels of monoterpenes that decline sharply over time. But that high level of monoterpenes are what bark beetles pick up on to tell that a tree is stressed, or that, so once you chip a tree, those monoterpenes just get pushed out into the atmosphere, and bark beetles with their tiny, delicate little antennae can pick up on that very easily. One study found a 3-fold increase in attacked trees, bark beetle attacked trees in chip plots versus lop and scatter. And I'll get into what lop and scatter is here in a minute. Raking chips away from the tree does not affect attack rates whatsoever. There's no larger diameter material left for bark beetles to colonize. So if they came to this project area with all these trees that were left, that were standing healthy green, there's nothing on the ground. Maybe they landed on the chips, and they're like, I can't lay my eggs here. So they went to the standing dead trees, standing healthy trees, and attacked those instead. October to January only, or chip into a trailer and remove each day from your property. Lop and scatter. So this is where we just take the smaller diameter stuff and just kind of, lop it up into sections and leave it laying on the ground, spread it around to help with, grass growing, or throw it down in like a little V thing to help with drainage area, to help with erosion. Monoterpene release is slow and steady. over time, so it wouldn't bring in bark beetles like chipping. Some material left on site may be colonized. It may be big enough. You should be removing everything big enough to be colonized, but some stuff may be left accidentally or whatever that could be colonized. It may be safer than chipping or mastication during bark beetle active period. So if you do thin in the middle of summer, this may be the best thing to do with the stuff that's left on the property that's not removed for firewood or just removed, by whoever the contractor. Mastication, monoterpene release somewhere between chipping and lop scatter. So mastication, basically, these contractors have these huge machines that just grind up. They can just run over trees and grind stuff up. And some material left on site may be colonized. So there's like large chunks of wood here and there that have been kind of like, split in half and stuff. So that's somewhere in between chipping and lop and scatter. Site features that may influence bark beetle activity. Dwarf mistletoe, this is a big one. If you have dwarf mistletoe on your property, there's a picture of it. You've probably seen it before. Tree mortality can be 3 to 4 times higher than in uninfested areas. And that's, either directly from dwarf mistletoe. Dwarf mistletoe does not photosynthesize. It robs the tree. It gets all of its resources from the tree. And if you have a huge infestation in the canopies of each of your trees, it's taken a lot of water and a lot of nutrients from that tree, or it can stress it out enough to where the bark beetles can the tree will release those monoterpenes, those chemicals, those stress chemicals that bark beetles can pick up on, and then bark beetles come in because they frequently attack heavily in infected trees, especially during drought. And that project had a lot of dwarf mistletoe in it. And there's dwarf mistletoe on pinyon and ponderosa. They're 2 separate species, but they both act the same way to trees, rob them of everything. Aspect, so does your property face north or south, or is it just flat? No aspect whatsoever. Does it face east or west? But we know, northern facing slopes in the northern hemisphere are cooler and drier. And south-facing slopes are sunnier, warmer, and drier. Elevation and latitude, of course, in these mountains, there's a good amount of elevation difference depending on where you live. Latitude, kind of speaking of, do you live in the southern part of the state or the northern part of the state? Microclimate and microtopography. So, do you have some depressed areas on your property that may be a little cooler and moister than some of your ridges, stuff like that. And microclimate and microtopography can kind of go hand in hand. And check the forest health dashboard for bark beetle activity near your home if you're just curious of what's going on around you. We really prioritize when we're doing those aerial surveys, we prioritize national forest lands, but we do get the periphery of we do the Cibola or there in the Sandias, and we do get some of Sandia Park and stuff when we do our surveys. And just for time's sake, I was going to show you the dashboard, but there's a link to it right there. Also a link at the end of this presentation. Basically, you can zoom in to Sandia Park or wherever you live and just see what's going on around you based on last year's data. So we have 2020 data up there now. Well, after we finish in August, we'll have 2021 data. Identifying bark beetle infested or killed trees. Symptoms: yellowing or browning needles. You can see there on that kind of in the middle top there, those yellowing, browning needles. Those trees had definitely been attacked. Still had beetles in them, but had been attacked, months earlier. That tree on the left there with kind of the whitish tips, that was actually an Edgewood. And I had never seen that before. This was attacked by twig beetles. So twig beetles are a type of bark beetle, and it had like whitish tips. So be aware that it doesn't exactly have to be yellow or brown. It can be like this white. Eventually that tree will turn all yellow or brown, but that was a very initial stages of attack. And pitch tubes. You can see pitch tubes on the far right vertical picture. So, but in times of drought, not every tree will produce pitch tubes. So you might have to look for boring dust. Boring dust we see in the bottom middle picture, in the little bark crevice there, that's boring dust. So as the bark beetle tunnels in through the bark into the, into the inner bark layer, it pushes out all that dust, as it chews through, it pushes it behind them. So if it's like severe drought, not all trees will produce pitch tubes. So you look for that boring dust. And some more signs are exit holes. You can't really see them too well on some tree species. Pinion's a good one you can see it on, and juniper, you can see it on good. It's harder for like Doug fir and other things. You will definitely notice increased woodpecker activity on your property if you have some bark beetle infested trees. And you might, if you like to go out and look at your trees, if you notice something's going on, you can look for parasitoids or other predators of bark beetles on the bark. That's an ichneummonid wasp right there on the left. You can see that long, it's not a stinger, it's an ovipositor. So that's what she uses she drills into the tree with that ovipositor and lays her eggs in those bark beetle galleries. That egg hatches, or she lays it on the larvae of the bark beetles, and that egg hatches, and that larvae feeds on the larvae of the bark beetle. But that's that was on a juniper tree in Cuesta. But those parasitoids, those wasps, are everywhere in the state. What you should do if you have bark beetle infested trees, fell. The best choice, number one choice, is to fell, to cut it down. Either you or somebody come in and fell and remove the tree from the property promptly within 30 days. Again, because those bark beetles will come out. Take to transfer station or somewhere without the same species of trees. Healthy species of trees, fell and immediately cut into 1 or 2 foot sections. That top photo is kind of what I mean there. Remove as much bark as possible. Get rid of all the bark if you can, if you're going to leave it on the property, and lay in a single layer in the sun away from healthy trees. Fell and remove and immediately split into firewood. Again, try to remove as much bark as you can when you're doing this, but stack away from healthy trees of the same species. Try to put it somewhere that's isolated from other trees of that same species. And does covering bark beetle infested wood with plastic work? It does increase, the temperatures can go way up in those areas, but, with the wind that we have here in New Mexico, that plastic can get blown away. A corner of the plastic can come up and the bark beetles can come out of that. It depends on how much wood you're dealing with and how much plastic you need. You might not have that much plastic or want to buy that much plastic. So really, number one there for me is just getting it off the property as fast as possible. I know I'm running out of time here. Try to go a little faster, and this is kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about.
Hey,
what
John,
can you? Yes.
Don't worry about your time. We can run over. It's no big deal. If people want to stay on, I have no problem letting you go as long as you want.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I just have a few more trees, but this is really kind of the heart of what I wanted to talk about. What can you do to protect your trees from bark beetles? And this is, again, focusing on pinyon and ponderosa pines, and juniper to some extent. Properly water overnight in times of drought. I mean, I suggest 3 to 4 hours at minimum, but overnight is the best. And you want to water once a month if no precipitation occurs during that month. So say, here we are in April. If we don't get any precipitation in April, you're going to want to water sometime at the end of April, overnight, with a soaker hose or something similar. Yeah, drip irrigation systems can be fine, but they have to be properly positioned on the tree, on the root system, and I'll get into that in a minute. And of course, if you have acres and acres of pinyon trees or whatever trees you can't water, all those trees, maybe you can, but usually you can't. So focus on your high value trees, those that offer shade to your house, that block out the neighbors, those kind of things. Water at the ideal watering zone. So you see that kind of image there. The ideal, so around the drip line, so where that canopy You see that drip line, that vertical line there, so that, don't water around the trunk of the tree. You want to bring it out a couple of feet or more and water. And that's why I kind of like soaker hoses, because as the tree grows, because irrigation systems, you got to kind of dig it up and move it around. I like soaker hoses, easy to move, easy to deal with, easy to replace. Water berms, so you see the bottom image there, can be detrimental. Those, if they stay there long enough, that kind of berm can suffocate the roots as the trees grow. Really the soil line needs to be the same throughout there. So if there's a large berm covering up your roots, it can actually suffocate them as that tree grows and those roots grow out. So I recommend just a nice thick layer, like 1 to 2 inches, or basically 2 inches of some sort of mulch. That's kind of what I like. It keeps the soil nice and moist, and you can replace it as you need to. You can add more as you need to. Again, you may need to move your drip irrigation systems to ideal watering zone. Keep that in mind. I moved into my house, and every single little drip area is not where it should be, and I don't want to deal with redoing the whole thing. So basically I got a soaker hose to kind of take its place. You can overwater pinyon and juniper. That's why I say just water once a month for at least 3 to 4 hours, but overnight is best. Insecticide sprays applied to bark. Not everyone likes using insecticides, and I completely understand. Carbaryl is one of the best ones to use. You spray just the bark. You don't spray the needles or anything. You spray the bark of the tree all the way around. Soak it up real good. That'll give you, depending on the type of carbaryl, or if you use some other insecticides are labeled for this, so it depends on which one you use. Carbaryl can go about 2 years before you need to reapply. Of course, when you're spraying insecticides around, there can be off-target effects to beneficial insects and other animals, particularly salamanders and lizards and those kind of things, frogs. Systemic insecticides, these are the ones that there's granular ones you can sprinkle in around the ideal watering zone and then water in, or there's some that is liquid formulation that you can mix with water in, or you can have tree companies come out that can actually inject it within your tree itself, and that uptake will happen in about 4 weeks, where the ones that you water into the roots may take a little bit longer to uptake to the tree to where it needs to go to protect from bark beetles. Triage is the big one. It's a formulation of imamectin benzoate. It's extremely expensive, but there are other ones that are available, like imidacloprid and stuff like that. But if you need to reach out to me, if you're interested in the systemics, and you can reach out to me, and I can give you a list of ones that aren't. That Triage, just for like 12 ounces, is like $1,500 or something. Offers protection for 2 years, minimal off-target effects, right? Because you're watering it right into the tree, or it's injected right into the tree. Of course, if it's a pinyon tree and you're eating the pinyon nuts from that tree, that insecticide is going to go up into the pinyon nuts. So just be aware of that. You may have to, not collect pinyon nuts from that tree anymore if you want to protect it. And then thin trees on property. More resources. If you take out trees on your property, that's more resources, more water, more minerals, more nutrients for the trees that are left. The bark beetle pheromones dissipate quicker. So in a really dense canopy of trees, those bark beetle pheromones. So bark beetles communicate with each other with pheromones. Once they start attacking a tree, and they're successful, they send out pheromones to recruit other bark beetles. They attack these trees in mass within just a few days, and they do this by pheromones. And there can be thousands, tens of thousands of bark beetles attacking a tree at one time, and that's how they do it, is with these pheromones. So when you open up your stand of trees, that pheromone doesn't get stuck. There's more airflow coming through, so it pushes out that pheromone quicker, and the bark beetles can't really communicate with each other as well in a properly thinned forest. Generally, trees go through a shock. Just so you're aware, trees do go through sort of shock a few years following thinning, they can just be like, oh, what happened? There's going to be more sunlight hitting the ground. It's going to dry out a little bit more. Your mycorrhizal fungi might dip down over the period of a few years, but they will recover. And as those trees do kind of get over that shock of the initial thinning, they will be healthier in the long run. Bark beetle killed trees in wildfire. Now, early on, so there's been a lot of research lately to kind of look at this. Early on, it was like, oh yeah, bark beetles do, bark beetle killed forests, and this is primarily for mountain pine beetle, because that's the one that really just, will go through and just kill thousands of acres in a large area, just a contiguous large area. But there's been a lot of research within the last 10 years that have found that, bark beetle killed trees only during a certain part of that time after they've been killed do they really pose the greatest threat. And that's when they still have the dead needles on, like that top picture there. Okay, so imagine a crown fire going through that dry, those dry dead needles that would just whip through there. And that's ponderosa. But imagine all those leaves or those needles falling off. Ponderosa doesn't have too many fine fuels, kind of like that second image. That's spruce. Spruce have a lot of fine, kind of like fine twigs, where ponderosa, not so much, not like spruce. So, basically all you're left with is kind of like a skeleton. So crown fires may be less severe in forest or woodlands where bark beetles have killed trees, but it depends on needle load and tree species. Okay, if the needles are on the trees like that, yes. But if all those needles drop off and there's just, nowhere for crown fire to kind of come through and push through, then not so much. It may take several years for those needles to drop. So, that could be a high risk area, especially when those trees are so close together. Like in the East Mountains, y'all have pretty widely spaced pinyon and juniper and stuff, and not everywhere, but in a lot of the areas. Initial dead needles have different chemical composition than green needles or dead needles from like drought killed trees. Basically, a bark beetle killed tree will kind of push out some different chemicals into the needles as they're being killed by bark beetles that they won't if they're killed from like drought. So, and it can be more flammable. Those chemicals that they push out to those needles can be more flammable. So we have to, but we're talking about pinyon really here, or juniper. And, once all those needles drop from the trees, then crown fires aren't as severe as they could be if it was a healthy green forest or a forest with dead needles from bark beetle killed trees. Of course, in that second image there, you see all those spruce trees. Of course, those will all fall over eventually. And we've, maybe some of y'all have seen these up in the Santa Fe National Forest in particular, where these spruce have been attacked and killed by spruce beetle and have fallen over. It looks like that bottom picture. At that point, all those trees have fallen over, so you don't really have, you have gaps in the canopy. So your crown fire is gone because of these large gaps, but now you have a lot of downed woody debris on the ground that may support fire. The fire will most likely stay on the ground because, ladder fuels aren't going to really be there anymore. And if needles are absent in the crown or large gaps in the canopy. So, once they fall down, really the fire should be contained to just the ground itself. The fire will clean that up. Eventually that'll be a nice kind of park-like setting if the fire is intense enough. But if it's just a low intensity fire, of course, not all that stuff will be burnt up. So, and in these East Mountains, you'll have a lot of mineral soil, so it's hard for ground fire to come through. Bare mineral soil. Some areas more mineral soil, more bare soil than others. But it just depends on what you're looking at. Do you have a dense forest? If you do, and if you do have an outbreak of bark beetles, those needles will remain on the tree for quite a while. So you got to remember, but what I'm saying is, regardless, you need to get those bark beetle killed trees off your property within 30 days. So hopefully you won't have those fine dead needles that will support a crown fire. All right, here's links, the forest health report, the story map that I went over, the data dashboard, which I didn't show you, but is particularly useful for landowners, especially if y'all have a second house somewhere up in the mountains, and then link to the current US drought monitor map for New Mexico, which basically looks like the one that I showed you from January. Just some references. This was on bark beetles and the chipping and thinning and all that stuff that I showed you. And finally, when I agreed to take on extra work, why did I take on that extra work and successfully completed extra work? I'll take questions.
I've got one ready to go on the chat.
Okay.
A gentleman that lives up in the Angel Fire area, he has a question. He wanted you to comment on the spruce fir above the 10,000 foot south of Angel Fire. Can you comment on, I guess, my interpretation would be, do you have a specific pest in that area that you're seeing or what? I don't know. Anyway, go ahead.
So if it's spruce and Angel Fire and it's probably west of Angel Fire, that's going to be spruce beetle. Yes, spruce beetle. What we see in cork bark fir a lot of times is root disease can really, and we see this a lot in the Sandias, and we see this a lot in the southern part of the Santa Fe National Forest, is root disease in cork bark fir. There is a bark beetle that attacks cork bark fir, the western balsam bark beetle. It attacks cork bark fir, but just maybe like a tree here or there, or maybe if it does attack in a little area, it might be 2 or 3 trees. So nothing like spruce beetle. So cork bark fir is going to be either root disease or that bark beetle, and then spruce is going to be spruce beetle for sure.
Okay, I have another one on treatment for pinon needle scale. What do you recommend?
So this is a hard one. I've worked with several homeowners associations in Santa Fe who did not want to spray chemicals. They wanted to go the high pressure water route, so spraying those cottony egg masses off the undersides of crotches of trees or on the bole of the tree. Both of them tried for many, many years, and it did not work. The only thing you can do for pinion needle scale is spray them with a mixture of horticulture oil and carbaryl, and usually a tree company will have to do that, or a systemic insecticide. So the same thing that I mentioned for bark beetles, you would use a different product. You would use either imidacloprid or one of the other systemics for scale, for hard scale, armored scale. So those are the only 2 things that work. Unfortunately, those are the only 2 things that work for getting pinion needle scale infestation under control.
Okay, I have a quickie. If you could throw into the chat and your email address so people can get in touch. And when you do throw it into the chat, people, all you have to do is cut and paste and put that in some sort of savable whatever you want to put in a Word document, whatever. Okay, as you're doing that, I have another quick question. When is a good time to transplant or replant junipers and pinon? The individual, Beth, says that she's had bark beetles basically rip through her property before they moved in and now have very sparse areas. So is there any recommendation you can give her on transplanting, replanting?
The best time to transplant or replant any tree is winter. It's dormant. Basically, it's dormant. You can move it around, you can do whatever, you put it back in the tree. It's really harsh on a tree if it's in the growing season, but fall or winter is the best time, like late fall or winter is the best time to transplant.
Okay, it looks like I have one from Glenn. On his pinon, he's had a lot of dead branches on the underside of the canopy. Should he cut them off or remove them?
So those, so especially conifer trees, they self prune. So, it's a thick, dense canopy, not a lot of sunlight's getting to those bottom branches. So that tree knows to basically kill off those bottom branches. They're not serving any purpose anymore. So that's why they're dead. That's completely up to you, whether you want to take them off or not. I usually don't, on trees on my property, unless, they're in the way or something. But then again, they can be ladder fuel. So it's just personal preference on that. And they're dead, so you don't really have to worry about, them putting out like a monoterpenes, those chemicals that bark beetles can pick up on, because they're dead and they don't have those chemicals anymore.
Okay. Another gentleman said he has cut down and mulched his pinos that were dead on his property. Is that okay to use that mulch around the property?
I mean, if you haven't seen, if you went ahead and used it and you haven't seen any bark beetle issues on your property, it was okay. Just beware how many, like, that project area that I was talking about near Santa Fe. I mean, who knows how many trees they thinned. So that was like probably, 50 to 100 trees that they thinned on that property. So that's a lot of wood chips. So if you're dealing with just maybe a couple of trees, it's probably okay to do it in August. However, I would strongly suggest doing it during the winter. So if you didn't have any issues, then it was okay. If it was done, if you did it recently, I would, wait maybe a couple of months before you spread those around the property, and if you do chips like that, just make sure they're away from like healthier trees on your property.
I have another quick one here. When is a good time to transplant a ponderosa?
Again, winter time. And New Mexico State Forestry does have a seedling conservation program. You can order seedlings from us. They're super cheap, like $2 a seedling. So, keep that in mind if you want to reforest your property, that you can get them from us super cheap compared to like Lowe's or something like that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I saw that second question down there.
Okay,
so generally we say once a tree starts getting attacked, starts getting infested by bark beetles, even if it hasn't started changing colors in the canopy yet, it's dead. Even if it's still green and it's infested, it's dead. However, there's probably 0.0001% of the time where a tree that's not under drought stress, that's properly watered, can withstand an attack initially, and use those pitch tubes that's the tree's response to the insect invading. So what it does is it tries to pitch out that insect, that bark beetle, with its pitch. If it has enough water, now in times of drought like we're in now, they don't really have enough water to do that. But they can, yes, they can repel that attack and go on living. So it can happen, but it's pretty rare. Especially in times of drought. It's super rare in times of drought that they can withstand an attack and repel the invader and live.
Okay, this is kind of a question from me, John. Mm-hmm. Now we're looking at high value pet trees. If you water them, if you see the drill holes and you see the dust, if you water them in this time of drought, is there any potential for a high value pet tree to recover potentially? I know it's probably pretty low, but is there any possibility if you help it?
Well, at that point, it's too late. Really, what you want to do is proactive or preventative watering. Water those trees. At that point in time, it's probably too late, but miracles do happen. Trees do recover. It can happen. I'm not saying it will never happen. So it can, yes, but it's probably too late at that point.
So a better way, and from your framework then, is if you have a high value pet tree, water it before you even notice anything.
Yes, you need to be watering that tree once a month if we don't get any rain or precipitation. And one more thing, rain is much better than snow here in the Southwest. the snow that we get, in the East Mountains there, maybe to Harris or wherever in the higher elevations of East Mountains, if you get a little bit more snow than down lower, a lot of the snow here, even at 10,000, 11,000 feet elevation, a lot of that snow sublimates. Basically, that means it vaporizes before it even melts. So, it's such dry snow that it just basically sublimates or vaporizes into the atmosphere before it has a chance to melt and seep into the ground. So spring rainfall is probably the best thing for trees in the Southwest, but our monsoons are second. So, but if we don't get either one of those, then that's really bad. But yes, if we don't get any rain within a month period, you need to be watering that tree 3 to 4 hours or overnight at best, if it's high value tree.
I have three questions that popped all about the same time there. And I think if you go to the New Mexico State Forestry website, is that where they can order trees?
Correct. New Mexico State Forestry Division, and then there's a program tab, and then you'll see, or maybe it's just on that header bar. You'll see seedling program or conservation seedlings. You click there, it shows you everything you need to know.
Okay, Gail had a quick question there. How effective is spraying once or twice a year on these bark beetles?
Spraying insecticides, it's very effective if you're using the right insecticide.
Got a question on cholla, pests on them?
Yeah, there's actually several there's actually several pests on cholla. There is a longhorn beetle, which is they have these really long, and you'll see them on pine trees too, really long antennae that are usually twice as long as their body, sometimes as long as their body, but most of the time twice as long or 1.5 times long as their body. There are one of those that will get in there and use that. And I think there are maybe some caterpillar species that use it too. But what you can do is maybe net those, the ones that are, put some netting or something over it, some fine mesh netting where insects can't get through, might be the best thing for that if you want to go that route.
Okay. Individual asked, a quart of bark beetle infected pino that was cut down last year. Is it okay to split it for firewood at this point?
I would say okay. Yes, it is. Last summer, yes. Hopefully that black plastic stayed sealed all the way around the bottom. But I would, if you do that again this year, I would recommend splitting it before you cover it with wood. That way it can dry out faster. And if there are any, remaining bark beetles in that wood, that wood will dry out and they'll die quicker than leaving it whole under that wood. But yes, it'll be good. It'll be good.
Go ahead. Sorry. Brian had a question about beetles here to stay, and I kind of want to throw this in. Beetles are part of the environment, so of course they're here to stay. It all depends on the drought, lack of drought. So I guess you kind of agree with that opinion. Is that true, John?
Yes. So there are 3 phases that bark beetles can be in, and one is just latent, where they're just out there, just kind of doing their thing. They're living. They're not in outbreak status, and that's what we usually see. They're just out there attacking a tree here, attacking a tree there. So yes, it's worth planting seedlings for sure. However, our seedling program manager, she said the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago because it was a less harsh environment. So just, you're planting a seedling in the middle of an exceptional drought, in the middle of extremely warmer temperatures than we've ever seen before. So keep that in mind. That can be even worse on your seedlings than a bark beetle can, 20 years down the line. Now, and let me say something about the 2000s outbreak in the early 2010, especially the early 2000s outbreak. Those trees were drought stressed. Those bark beetles killed them off, but they didn't kill out all the trees in the forest. The ones that remained are probably more drought tolerant. So what we're having is trees out there that were killed off that were less drought tolerant. Now the ones that are remaining are more drought tolerant, and they're putting out progeny. They're putting out offspring and seedlings that will probably have the genetic code for being more drought tolerant. So bark beetles are actually, they're out there, they're doing the thing. They're thinning unhealthy forests. They're attacking stressed trees, so but what I'm trying to help y'all with is just protecting the trees that have value to you, around your house and stuff. Because you can't protect every single tree on your property unless you want to spend tens of thousands of dollars, which maybe you do.
So there's the question from Janet, and I'm sure you see all this too, but large pinon, give her a recommendation on where she should place her soaker hose.
How long a soaker hose should I use for? Well, you want it to go around that whole periphery of the drip line, or that ideal watering zone that I showed you. So you can place it at the drip line right underneath the tree. So, if it's a 14-inch diameter tree, that diameter, that crown diameter, whatever your crown diameter is. So it might be 20 feet. You need to get a 20-foot long soaker hose, or longer, and just wrap it around a couple of times, because you might, have another tree that might be bigger that you might want to water sometime.
Here's a really interesting question, and I kind of am on board with this one. What kind of water softeners, if you're using water from your house that is softened as opposed to having a separate system, is there any concern here?
Actually, I visited a house in Harris, and they wanted me to check with their neighbor because they were having some ponderosa issues, and they were using gray water from their showers, from their washer and dryers, or from their washers, from their dishwasher, from their sinks, and they were using gray water to water their trees. And I saw some noticeable browning in the needles. So it's best if you collect rainwater from your roof, or use your well water. But it's best if you don't use gray water, because it's high in nitrates. It's high in other kind of chemicals, and nitrates in particular can really stress a tree, and or make it more kind of attractive to bark beetles, and defoliators too, for that matter.
Okay, so this is coming from me, continuing on with your comment there. If I'm using softened water, which is not gray water, just it's directly off of the exterior tap,
Mm-hmm.
that is still a significant. Now there are two types of softeners also. There's the sodium softeners and potassium softeners. So again, kind of moving forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would suspect it would have some sort of effect on the tree health. So I'm not sure what effect. You could try water in one tree over a couple of years and just see the effect that it's having. It might not have an effect at all. So I just experiment. Just trial and error to see what's happening to maybe just one tree in particular. And maybe not one of your real high value trees, maybe one that's just kind of where you can water it, but it's not really a high value tree. But I'm maybe it has an effect, maybe it doesn't. I've never really seen that in the literature, and I've never really come across it other than what I was talking about, gray water. So
yeah, my interpretation about gray water, it has a lot of soaps in it, which has a lot of different types of chemicals, which may be way different than just water softening chemicals. But anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think it'll have an effect, and I've never run upon that before. So
okay. I don't see any more questions in the chat, everybody. If everybody is pretty well caught up, I would be willing to let John close it up. I think this was incredibly informative, and I really appreciate you've been able to come down or come be on this for us. I think this is really cool.
Absolutely, and that's with COVID, of course I'd rather do this in person, but this is kind of a good way for everybody on a Saturday morning to get together, and that's what that's kind of what I'm want to reach out to is landowners, homeowners, because there are a lot of tree companies out there that try to fearmonger and sell you things you don't need, And, for me to come out to your house is a free service. It's your federal taxpayer dollars at work. And, I'm always available to come down and take a look. If you want to get together with a couple of your neighbors and I can come take a look at all your properties or just whatever, I'm here. And that's kind of what I want to get rid of is the fear mongering, the trying to sell you things that you don't need, and just get you the science and what works and the most cost efficient way possible.
Now, there was a quick question right there. Somebody was asking about email link. Just for everybody's sake, this recording will go out to everybody's email probably later today. I will be sending you all a recording link. It will be a permanent link for everybody. So if that kind of answers that question for you, Ron and Pat, I think it sort of does. And anyway, this recording is going out later today if I can get it down off of the Zoom and send it back up to the YouTube, and that's where it goes. So
excellent. And John, I'll send you a PDF to this presentation that'll have clickable links, because I'm not sure if they'll be able to click on the links.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that'd be super, because what I'll do is after you send that to me, I will send that also out to everybody too. So,
Okay.
All right. So
Hey, John,
Yeah.
it's
Go
Karen
ahead.
tonight. You know what I recommend? This program was exceptional as far as the East Mountain, the relevance and the support you've given us. I really would like to see it probably done again, not the recording, but the live of you on the Zoom done again, possibly in August or September, if you're available. It was just phenomenal. And I like the idea right now where we can, question, answer specifically. So maybe John, if you can, if we could do that or schedule that, I think it would be great. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure which John you're talking to, but absolutely.
Both of you, both of you.
By then I'll have, we'll do our aerial survey. We'll have, new data. Then, maybe we'll try to get a little bit more of Sandia, the East Mountains than we normally get just for y'all, because there's a lot of activity happening there now that you can have access to. And by then we'll kind of see what's happening, what the exceptional drought, what kind of factors or what's happening on the ground with this prolonged drought conditions.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It was great.
all right, I'm going to stop the recording because I don't want to hear myself on the recording. And